Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome back to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. Today, I am joined by Sarah Rege, the Sustainability Director at Webcor. And today, we are going to talk about a whole bunch of really cool stuff. Her transition from working in architecture to a general contractor. We're going to talk about carbon footprint and reductions and ways that Webcor is tackling these challenges, a whole bunch of other stuff. But before I start rambling for the next 10 minutes or so, Sarah, how are you doing today?
Hi, Eric. Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing great. I think summer's my favorite season, so I was excited to see the sun out today and get the week going well.
We're lucky today here in San Francisco. I've made the trek down from Oregon to hang out in the beautiful San Francisco office. And so if you are listening to this on Spotify or Apple or wherever, you should head over to YouTube because we are in a very beautiful facility and you can see what it looks like, in the background. But today, as I mentioned a moment ago, we are talking all about sustainability. But before we get too deep into that, I'm really interested. You made a big shift in your career in the last few years from working at a design firm as an architect to leading sustainability at Webcor. Can you tell me what made you consider such a big change and share what you're focused on in this new role?
Having been on the design side for over 25 years almost, the last 10 at Perkins & Will, I was working with Webcor and the Webcor team, so I got to know a lot of those team members. They're still, working at Webcor. And then I really also got to know the CEO, Matt Rossi, and his embracing of sustainability and the entire executive committee, the way they really want it to be, a feature for Webcor and for the business, made me very interested in this challenge to kind of broaden the areas that I'm able to focus on. Not only sustainability, but it really brought out new things, things like, the fleet vehicles, things on the design side you don't really get to touch.
It's such an interesting shift, and it sounds like you're doing some really cool work. And I have to chuckle, like we work in such a big, small industry because you build those relationships, you work with a contractor or a sub for years and years, and it's not uncommon for folks to kind of make shifts, although I think your big shift as far as role and responsibility is a unique and really cool one. And I'm just thankful for that community as far as the relationships we get to build. And, I'm excited to hear how you're leveraging that to dig into sustainability a bit more intentionally. Let's get a baseline for everybody out there listening right now. We're going to throw out some terms that everybody might not be familiar with. So could you just define sustainability a little bit for us? And, things like carbon footprints or, what does carbon neutral mean or zero waste initiatives? I'd be curious to kind of have that baseline for us today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sustainability has a lot of acronyms and a lot of terms that can feel like another language. To me, I'm kind of used to it, so I think it's good to start that way. So sustainability in the most resilient way is not only kind of the obvious environmental or doing what's right for the planet long term. It's also balanced what's doing right for the communities, kind of that social aspect. And then the third piece is really the economic or the viability of the strategy. So I always refer to that as the three-legged stool, that you can't do one without the other. And I think that's a more holistic approach to sustainability. More recently, carbon has been a focus, from the sustainability standpoint. Carbon neutral, to me, and this might be a little technical, is looking at both the operational carbon or your operational emissions and then combining that with embodied carbon, and then looking for ways to reduce and offset that to where you're net zero.
It makes a bunch of sense. And I keep hearing the carbon conversation come up, especially with things like mass timber, as far as the encapsulation of what that is.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful folks are starting to think about this more intentionally, because I don't think it was, a conversation folks were having 5, 10, 15 years ago in such a meaningful way. But I think there's also access to data that we didn't have historically as well. It's really evolved in recent years. So what is pushing so many companies right now to start looking at their carbon footprint and the amount of waste that's generated on their projects? I mean, I know it's been part of the conversation, but I feel like it's really shifted in recent years, and I'm curious as to why.
From my standpoint, having been on the design side, there was a real focus on operational energy and efficiency for so long. And I think LEED coming to the market and really that rating system being focused on operational energy pushed it very successfully. towards, a more efficient solutions. And now, like you mentioned, in the last, several years, the combination of the operational energy with the embodied carbon has really been an area of focus. So all of the materials that we use in the project, how much emissions and energy are those taking to be created, to be transported to the site? I mean, these are things that we weren't thinking about before that now we're able to think about, to have the data to support and to really measure, to quantify those, and then look for ways to ultimately reduce them on all our projects.
And I feel like the progressive owners especially are starting to, I mean, they always thought about the full life cycle of their project to some degree, but the nuance there is starting to become really impressive as far as what material choice have I made today and how is that going to impact how much it costs to run my facility, or, the amount of insulation I have, and all of these different factors. If you're just doing the pure line item cost conversation, there's a big part of the possible, cost savings, environmental impact, all of these things you mentioned a minute ago, that's easy to miss because you're so fixated on today's spend. So I think we're headed in the right direction, and I'm encouraged by that. But I want to go back to that data point that I mentioned a moment ago. And I'm curious, how did you choose what data to evaluate tied to Webcor's carbon footprint? And how do you capture and track that information? Like, what does that process look like? It seems like a bit of a bear, to say the least.
Definitely. One of our corporate social responsibility goals was to do just that, to create our carbon footprint. So we started with something we thought was pretty achievable, looking at our scope 1 and 2 emissions, identifying what those sources of our emissions are in those categories, and then looking at what data we had on each of those sources. I think one of the things that we had to kind of work through, and I think this is good for anyone who's starting and doing their carbon footprint, is that we don't have perfect data. We haven't been measuring all these things historically, but we don't want that to let us stop that initial measurement, because once you get something measured, then you can look at how to improve the quality of that data and then ultimately how to reduce it. So scope 1 and 2 is where we started. I think there's, we're a California builder, so there's a lot of legislation coming through that is also starting with scope 1 and 2. So I think we're ahead in that regard, that we've now been through a couple evaluations. We've got higher quality data. We're putting in place, tracking mechanisms that are not only manual, we're starting to automate those processes. So it's definitely a journey where we're still very much in process. So scope 3 is something that we're just starting to get different sources that we can track, but a lot of room to grow. And I think I don't get discouraged by the amount of things we're tracking now. I think we want to track as much as possible, and that's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah, it makes sense. And can you do me a favor, and could you qualify what scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 encompasses as well? I'm candidly, I'm not super familiar with the detail, and so I think it'd be helpful to just make sure people understand what's captured in those different levels.
Sure, and I'm speaking for our business. So scope 1 is your direct emissions, so things like your emissions from your fleet, if you have natural gas in your offices, those kind of things. And then scope 2 is your indirect emissions, so where you're purchasing electricity from the grid. And then scope 3 is the upstream and downstream emissions that are not included in either scope 1 or 2.
Okay. It's so interesting to be able to get that granular over time as well. But there is importance in thinking about that. I mean, a small scale example that I think about sometimes is, just ordering a bunch of stuff online versus going to the store. And I occasionally be like, gosh, like somebody has to drive to my house every single time I get this one single thing. And, you can't source everything locally, of course, but it's such a interesting balance of, I think, convenience in the consumer market, at least for that regard, versus, how is this impacting the environment if the UPS guy has to drive to my house, 3 times a week versus, once every month or something. And I know that's, narrowing that down very considerably, but it's not something everybody thinks about.
Yeah, and I think that that example is a good example of both emissions and waste, right? So all of these convenient measures can cause unnecessary emissions, but also maybe disposables or things that go into the waste stream that can't readily be reused.
Yeah, I can think of so many times where I open a box where I've ordered something, the size of my fist or a basketball or something, and it's a box that's 4 feet by 6 feet filled with a bunch of packing material. You just kind of stand there and look at that and you go, why has this happened? And I think we can be really intentional, and it's cool. I'm excited to learn a bit more about what your team is doing. And You mentioned your fleet vehicles a minute ago, and that was the biggest driver of emissions at Webcor. Can you tell me more about this initiative and what those challenges that you faced as you started shifting your fleet from being a gas-powered predominantly fleet vehicles to more EVs?
That initial carbon footprint effort where we looked at our scope 1 and 2, one of the major drivers for doing that was to see how our kind of carbon pie lined up so that we could decide what would be the biggest area to tackle and make successful reduction. So like you mentioned, the fleet vehicles consistently over 60% of our scope 1 and 2 carbon footprint. So an easy to identify that as an area to start our emissions reductions. So like I mentioned, I'm on the design side. Fleet vehicles is a new area for me. So I've learned a lot about vehicles in the last couple of years. I think some of the things we wanted to overcome were the perception that, there's a lot of perception around electric vehicles as having, limited range or difficult to maneuver, all these things. Some of the things that have come online recently with, our vehicle fleet also, I should mention, the biggest piece of that is light duty trucks. So you think about, we're a contractor, the superintendent vehicles, those F-150s, that kind of size of truck, getting that user to transition to a Prius, not very attractive. So historically, that has not been successful. But now with the new vehicles coming on the market that really have a lot of the same capabilities as those traditional, light duty trucks, it's starting to become, or we've seen it become a more viable option. So we did some internal surveys to really get like, what are the things people are thinking about? Range anxiety came up consistently. Also, infrastructure, that there isn't charging at home, office, job site, all of these things. Those were kind of the two primary. And then, I think that just it's new. Yeah. And that's like, we don't really know how to do this. Also, there were some positives about carpool lanes, EV lanes, these kind of things that, depending on where people were commuting from, could be seen as a real benefit to having an EV. So on the policy side, we worked to evolve our EV policy. We really felt like, based on the survey, and then we asked for volunteers, we really needed some incentives right now to get those critical mass early adopters into these vehicles. So we have a higher vehicle allowance. You get a little bit more money for your vehicle if you choose an EV. And then you also were doing some incentives to set up home charging. So like a one-time incentive for that, and then electrical cost stipend monthly after that. And if you're in a position where you're, in an apartment or you can't add an EV charger, then we, allow that to be charged on a card so that you can charge at, charging stations. Nice. So it's definitely not a perfect solution. I think the infrastructure has to catch up to a lot of these things. But right now we have done some post-EV adoption surveys and a lot of good comments. I think there's still room to be done to get charging, in more places, but it's been overall pretty successful.
Yeah, and I chuckle because I've seen that conversation firsthand of like, are you going to give me the option of a Prius or an F-150? And 99.9% of the people who are presented with that question go, well, yeah, give me the F-150. And I understand, especially for folks who are predominantly field-based and need to use a truck. A Prius just doesn't suit that that necessity in that moment. And I remember in one of the last GCs that I worked at, I was also offered a vehicle stipend. I didn't want it. I didn't have anywhere to put it. And so I, opted out because I commuted on motorcycle that time. But that matched back really closely to the point you made about the, lane sharing or the fast track lanes and all the opportunities to get to work easier. And so I think you've incentivized things in a really thoughtful way. And we're just very fortunate that the technology has advanced in the last, 5-6 years for EV trucks specifically, where they are more desirable now. And we can do away with a lot of those, common misconceptions or reasons why folks had been hesitant historically. And I think also, folks do care about the greater good as well. And when you sell that alongside, hey, here's a bonus and you get to go to work faster and we're going to, give you a little extra kickback as far as the, way we're going to support you with this vehicle, there's a lot of wins there. And so it's a pretty cool thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also had mentioned that Webcor has adopted a new rating system for waste on your projects. And I'm interested in hearing a bit more about this and, what drove that change And what's in this rating system? Like what's driving you to, push this forward?
So a big scope 3 category is construction and demolition waste for us. So the organization USGBC, the U.S. Green Building Council, that puts out the LEED rating system, they recently put out a couple years ago a new system, as you mentioned, True Zero Waste for construction. And so Webcor was a pilot adopter of the system on a large project, Genesis Marina, that just completed. And the idea was we really liked the True system because it looks at, historically it's been about all of the waste that you create, can you recycle, X percentage? And True is supporting a circular economy, so it looks much more broader than that. How can you actually eliminate waste coming to the job site, keep materials on site and reuse them? All of these things that it incorporates into the rating system. And we thought that was really valuable. And I think the project, was the first certified True Zero Waste for construction project in the world.
Really?
Yeah, at the gold level. So I think it's a really good success story. We have a ton of lessons learned. And when you talk to the field team, there were a number of things that worked and didn't work. But it was really getting into areas we hadn't gotten into before. So talking to folks, anyone who was bringing any material to the site, we wanted to understand, how it was being transported, what it was being wrapped in. So things that, may have traditionally been wrapped in like thin film plastic that is, not recyclable and just creates waste. There's no, end market for it. We can't really divert it, even if we isolate it. Talking to them in advance, can you wrap it in blankets? Can you wrap it in something, cardboard where you can take it back with you? And having those conversations and other things like, if we're buying caulking, can we, not have 500, smaller tubes? Can we get buckets in larger scale? So just really thinking about how things are on site and where we can create less waste. So that was really exciting to see those conversations happening and some good success stories there.
And it's such an intentional thing as well, because it's very easy to think, okay, that's the supplier. They're bringing this to me and that's not my responsibility. But it is in a very big way because, one, you're sourcing those materials too, but you also have to deal with all of that waste. And so I think when we build those relationships and start communicating the reasons why, I think a lot of times somebody might not have thought about it in that scope too. They go, well, we wrap, this piece of curtain wall in this material and that's just the way it's been done. And you step back and go, okay, well, no, we can do it differently and also have a big impact as well. So that's really cool. It seems like there's a lot of opportunity to continue improving that as well. Because I'm guessing it's not always easy to have those conversations too, because the simple thing to, move forward with might be the one that we've always done because we've got the machine that wraps it in plastic really quickly and we, just ship our material. But, we can be better and it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we saw was once the project team had really, understood the system and bought into the goals, we incorporated it into the safety training so that everyone on site knew that the project was good, pursuing True certification. And we were really getting ideas from the field, from folks out there about different things that they were seeing. Hey, we have, pallets that we're putting in the wood bin. Can we stack those separately? Can we reuse them, take them back to the yard? And it generated all of these initiatives where we were, able to isolate things and get them back, without downcycling them on the typical diversion stream.
I love that. And it really lends to how important it is to really truly be talking to folks that are out in the field as well. It's one thing to show up and just prescriptively say, we are doing this thing. And that may work in some situations, but I think most of us know at this point, you're going to triple the hesitation to change if you're just, rolling and saying, do it this way. But if it's help me understand where this waste is coming from. This is why we're doing this. And you have, a conversation, like you said, with that training that you set up and you're really communicative. I think folks are going to be, much more inclined to adopt the changes that we're implementing or requesting at least, instead of just paying lip service to it and then maybe not following through to the scope that they possibly could have. So
yeah, absolutely. Definitely wasn't easy. I am, not out in the field every day. So I know there's a lot of challenges and those kind of things, but I think, telling the why goes a long way in getting people's buy-in and then ultimately, having these be successful.
That's awesome. I'd like to shift a little bit. I know we're talking about the field right now and a lot of the waste, and I'd like to hear a bit more about when you're speaking to typical conversations with owners. And so when sustainability does come up in those owner conversations, what ideas or themes have you seen them focus on historically? Like where are their heads at with sustainability, and where might things be headed today, or what are you starting to hear more commonly now?
There are obviously a variety depending on the client and what their goals are. But most of the conversations start with some goals that are, I'd say, maybe a baseline required and then aspirational. And there is always cost becomes part of that conversation. I think LEED, like I mentioned, driving operational energy has been really successful in that. So LEED always comes up, are we going to be LEED certified? Can we get to in California, we have a really great green building code. So, does that get us to gold? How close are we? And then, of course, like how much does it cost? I think where it's shifted now is that owners are really aware of, again, we're a California builder, of legislation, of the conversation around embodied carbon. So I think it's a really good conversation. Not everyone's bringing it up. I think that's part of the value we want to add to projects, is because we take this integrated approach to sustainability. We want to introduce it as a part of the conversation and see where we can align and provide value, as early as we're brought onto the project.
Yeah, and that really leads into my next question, actually, is, what is the role of the GC in those conversations, especially if you have an owner who might be a bit more hesitant to, adopting change, or maybe not necessarily aware of some of these possibilities? Like how do you kind of drive that process when it makes sense and feels appropriate?
We approach sustainability in an integrated fashion, which I think really helps support that conversation. So projects have a really long life. Even if we're, just the construction phases of a project can be several years long. So I think what we like to do is introduce or provide awareness to all of the other, things that are going on with other projects in the area, with the, kind of California requirements, and talk about how the project could address these things, and have it be introduced at the beginning. Of course, cost comes into consideration. How's this going to impact the project? But start having that conversation as soon as we can. And I think that helps us get to the higher level of aspiration versus, they didn't ask for it, so we're not going to mention it. And then I've always seen on those projects, because of that lifeline, by the end of the project, someone's thinking about it. Like, what could we have done? And we would really want to tell that story about what we did versus, looking backwards and having missed an opportunity.
As a former proposal manager, like, I love hearing this because it influences how well RFPs are written as well, because you really get to say, okay, help me understand your criteria. Hey, your criteria could actually be better in these ways. And that does the owner a huge service, because they're going to be able to get more detailed information back. Things are going to be more, level set across all the bids or whoever they're talking to. And just help them be a bit more informed, especially if, the particular general contractor has more of that knowledge about a particular topic. And so it's such a relationships-based industry that we're in. And I think this is a really great example of that.
Yeah, I really like that word, informed, because I think that's a big part of it. It's not pushing or, focusing or anything like that. It's, bringing awareness and information early in the process.
Yeah, it's a big thing. And your point about, towards the end of the process, it hurts when somebody goes, okay, I really wanted to do this. And I'm like, well, the building is built. I'm very sorry. You can't do that anymore. But as we kind of drive that and we have that future lens, there's always that, hey, what about this? Just letting you know this is a thing, and you get to build on it, which does leave it into the next couple of questions I actually have for you. And I'm curious, in say 15 or 20 years, what topics do you think leaders in construction are going to be thinking about with regards to sustainability, especially in contrast to the ones that we're having right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think about 15, 20 years, we have zero emission vehicles by 2035 in California. So a lot of the milestones that we're striving for now will have been accomplished. So what comes to my mind is the innovations in technology that we don't know yet about. So what other zero emissions energy sources, whether it's fuel cells or whatever, have we developed and are we focused on? Are they cheaper in buildings? Are they faster to install? Are they smaller footprints, longer life? I think these technologies that are going to be emerging are really going to improve that overall carbon neutral goal in a way that I can't, say we're doing very successful. We're just not trying to do it right now.
And the technology evolution in recent years has been pretty incredible to see. I mean, like a good example for me would be like battery technology. And going back to the EV conversation, what we were able to do with battery tech 5-10 years ago it's an entirely different thing now. And of course, there is a separate environmental conversation about the creation of those batteries, but just that range anxiety and the ability to use the vehicles in the way that folks expect or would want to use, that narrative has shifted so much. And that's happening with solar panels, and the way that we, consume energy is all evolving. And so, maybe when we combine the Internet of Things with modern AI technology and, say, no, Skynet, we're not doing that here today. But I think there's a lot of cool potential on the horizon. And I agree with you. It's hard to say exactly what that's going to look like, because the baseline is going to be so dramatically different from where we're at right now.
Yeah, absolutely. The other area that comes to my mind, which is related to construction, I think, is the focus on health and wellness. We've seen that kind of through different rating systems that are complementary to LEED, like WELL and FitWell, and they've really, been increasingly used in the last few years. And, I have 2 teenage daughters, so I know they know so much more about health and nutrition. So how does that really shape how buildings are built, how workplaces are developed? I think that's going to be an exciting area of development as well.
There's a lot of intent right now that we didn't have the benefit of when, we were the age of your daughters. The health and wellness conversation that I had in school was health class, and I couldn't tell you a thing that I learned from it. And most of the information in that textbook was probably incorrect, because it was a textbook from like 1984, and it's very dated when we were using it. And I think we're just at a really cool moment where this evolution has had this inflection on how we talk about things, how we design the spaces that we live in and work in. And there's been some challenges in recent years that have driven us to this kind of new imagined way of how we build spaces for working and living and building community. I'm very thankful for what we do at Autodesk, because they've embraced this remote work, flexible work environment very intentionally. But alongside that, they've reconfigured all the spaces, like the one that we're sitting in right now, to set them up in a way that are more community driven. And so we get to use those when we bring people together without an expectation to just come to the office because you're supposed to. And I can say, I know firsthand, working in construction, productivity for me when I was still at GCs is your butt in that seat. And we're building things, obviously, at a contractor, but there is still some flexibility that we can offer people, and it has a big impact on wellness and, filling talent gaps and all kinds of other stuff that I could nerd out for another hour, so I'll just pump the brakes on that. But it's a really cool moment for our industry and just the way we work more broadly. So one more question on sustainability in the future, and we might have danced on this a little bit, so if I've stolen your answer already, I apologize. But I'm curious, do you have any other thoughts on how technology will or might play a bigger role as we continue achieving these sustainability goals? Like, what do you think that's going to look like in the next 10 or 15 years?
All of the, emissions kind of reporting and all of these things, I see that all being automated to really take the idea of having to manually input things out. And that's probably the near future. I hope that in the longer future, we're actually evaluating what these things are digitally before anything is really, realized, so that we're making decisions based on not only cost, but carbon emissions, and folding those 2 pieces together in a way where we can, harness all the reductions without causing waste as a part of that system.
And I think the faster that our technology evolves in capturing and managing that data, and like you said, not being a manual process, because that's hard to sustain at times, because 1, it takes a bunch of time, and 2, there's opportunities for mistakes when you're doing this manually. But as automation and AI start to touch that as well, the scale starts to change, and the ability to infer information from massive sets of data in a way that you or I, even if we were, mathematicians, couldn't accomplish in just, small amounts of time. And so I think as all of these things iterate, I think you're absolutely right. Like, it's going to be interesting. I'm not really sure what it's going to look like in 15 years. I'm very curious. I'm excited. I think we're headed in the right direction, but it's also, an important one at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, I think about leveraging that data, trying to, once you have all of these things in, cloud or whatever it is, we'll know so much more. We'll be able to see trends and call out things that are, out of alignment or different than inspected. Hey, the water use on this project, it should be X and it's Y. So I think we'll have this feedback loop that really doesn't exist now, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, it makes much of sense. And, just the ability to question something, not even in like a really critical way, just help me understand this. And it helps you inform more choices and, building that sustainability effort more broadly. So
Yeah.
it's cool. I appreciate you sharing all this context. I've learned a whole bunch today. I've got one more question for you. I really love asking this question, so I hope you've got an answer for me or ready to go. But what is one tool that you always use in every project, no matter what you're working on?
Yeah, that's an easy question for me. It's definitely my sketchbook. I think, being an architect, I'm a very visual person. So whether I'm taking notes or drawing things, and it is a paper sketchbook still, that's something that's important to me. It's kind of like my diary of thoughts, or I reference it. I have important information in there, and it's carried from project to project as a resource. So that's something that I use on every project.
That's cool. I like how you're able to carry that information too. You're not starting a new sketchbook for every single one. Um, Sometimes it just is so much more satisfying to write things down on a piece of paper. And I know as somebody who's hosting a technology focused podcast, that might not be the cool thing to say, but I think it's all right. Like sometimes it also helps the way, I think too, when I'm getting something on paper, although my handwriting has devolved over time because I don't do it very often anymore, but there is a bit of satisfaction tied to it. That's a cool answer. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much again for joining me on this episode of Digital Builder. This has been a real pleasure. I've learned a ton about sustainability, and I think, there's a lot of information here for folks to start making some changes with their own organizations, even if they're not being pushed by regulations wherever they might be, as far as where they're, headquartered or anything else. There's an opportunity, and I think also it's a business driver. So I'm excited. But aside from that, of course, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you really should head over to YouTube. We are in the San Francisco office right now, and it is a beautiful facility. So you can see, all the equipment we've got assembled and all the goofy faces that I make throughout this entire podcast. Otherwise, we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. If you want to say hi, you can find me on LinkedIn. I think, the only Eric Thomas that works at Autodesk, or you can find me on Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days at builder_digital. And without further ado, goodbye.